Struggling to make your Sony A7C II footage look cinematic? Maybe it looks like this. In this video, I'll show you the exact settings to finally get the stunning results that you imagined when you first bought this camera. And we're gonna do that by covering four main things. The first one is gonna be the global settings in camera. Next, I'm gonna take you through three common shots and all the settings that are specific to those. The first one's gonna be a vlog style shot. Next, we'll take a look at some cinematic slow motion. And the last type of shot that we'll look at is gonna be your talking head interview shot. Just like this one, I'll show you the exact settings that I use to get the shot that you're looking at right now. I encourage you to have your camera with you while we go through this and save this video for future reference in case you accidentally reset your camera or forget one of these important points. Oh, and there's gonna be a time-saving hack at the end of each one of our 4 points today, so be on the lookout for that. For this global settings section, I'm gonna go into the menu system of the A7C Mark II, and we're gonna talk about every setting that I change. The camera's gonna come out of box with a bunch of default settings. I'm gonna show you which ones are important for cinematic type of videos. If I don't talk about it, it's because I don't change them. And this is the global section. So these are settings that I change regardless of what type of shot that I'm doing. We'll refine that for specific type of shots once we get to the next sections of this video. The first thing you want to do is kick your camera into, well, first make sure it's in video mode and not in photo mode. You can do that right here. After that, spin the dial up top. We're going to put this in M for manual mode. And when it's in manual, it's going to open up all of the settings. If you keep your camera in the green auto mode, you're not going to have the ability to change everything that we talk about today. Auto is likely where you're going to want to be when you're first starting out, and that's fine. It's going to hold you back in time from making your stuff look exactly how you want it to. And yeah, hey, me and you, we'll make the manual thing a lot less scary. One more thing you want to check to make sure we get the most out of manual mode today in our red shooting menu here. Number 4, shooting mode, exposure control type. Just make sure that is in PASM mode as opposed to flexible expand mode. Next, we're gonna hit the menu button on the back of our camera, and it's gonna pull up the menu. And as I go through this today, I'm always gonna reference the menu item on the left here, which right now, for example, this red movie icon, I'll reference that menu, and it's the shooting menu, which you can see notated in the upper left there. That's the exposure and color. I'll always reference that before I go to the right over to the sub menu, and then we'll just follow this orange highlighter for the next item. So just pay attention to that as we go through, and as you're maybe going through with your camera at the same time, following along. For example, and we'll go slow for this first one. I'm on this red shooting menu right now. I'm gonna kick over to the right under image quality / recording. Kick over to the right again, and now we're going to be talking about the file format menu option. And in here's the first section that we're going to talk about making some adjustments to. Under file format, there's a lot going on here. I use XAVCS 4K. These are the different codecs in the camera. If you have this camera, you're probably not recording in these HD options. You're probably recording in 4K, our best resolution, our highest quality. XAVCS is Sony's standard codec. It's the one that I use. The quality is fantastic. Explain these other ones, it might make more sense. XAVCSI down here, that's arguably the highest quality that this camera can possibly shoot. They're also ridiculously big file sizes, so there's a trade-off there. Be honest with you, I don't notice a huge difference between XAVC-SI and XAVC-S. I don't think you will either. And then you have XAVC-HS 4K. That one is good. It kind of combines the best of both worlds, where it's supposed to be ridiculously high quality, kind of like SI, but it's in smaller file types like XAVC-S. The difference with that one, though, is that it's recording in an H.265 format as opposed to H.264. Where that's important is your computer needs to be able to work with H.265 files to be able to use it. So It can be good if your computer can do that. It does reduce some of our frame rate options that we're about to talk about. It's limited in the frame rate options, so keep that in mind. And let's talk about frame rates right now. So for me, XAVCS 4K, but you can choose what you think is best for you. Talking about frame rates, and this is where XAVC HS, for example, doesn't have 30. It only has 24 and 60. I'm still in... Just backing up here for a second, I'm still in XAVCS, which is why I have all of these frame rates available. And you have some options here. 24 and 30 are going to be one of those you'll kind of pick. I record in 30. Minor differences here. Most films that you see are recorded in 24p or 24 frames per second, 24p, 24 FPS, same thing. It's honestly incredibly negligible, and you're not going to notice a massive difference between the two. I record in 30, 24 and 30 is your regular motion option. 60p is going to be your slow motion option, so higher frames per second. We'll talk a lot about slow motion throughout the rest of the day today. And then for your record setting, your numbers might be a little bit different. Like if you're an XAVC HS or SI, these numbers look a little bit different. Most important thing here is that you're just choosing the biggest numbers. So for example, I'm in 140M422 10-bit. That 10-bit being of the utmost importance. This camera can record in what's called 10-bit color. Just a lot more color than what's available in 8-bit. It's a lot more desirable, a lot more natural. I strongly encourage everybody who has this camera to be using 10-bit. So just pick the highest numbers and you'll like the quality a lot. The next one, I'm going to scroll down, and yeah, we're going to be jumping around like back and forth across these. So again, stick with me. I'm on my exposure and color, this purple tab here. I'm going to kick to the right. I'm going to go to metering, kick to the right again, and you want these options. I don't use metering all that often. I only use this for like a vlog type shot. So making sure this is set right before we get into that section later on in the video is important. Metering mode, we set that to multi. Face priority and multi-metering, we set that to on, and spot metering point, we're going to keep that right at center. Again, more on metering soon. Let's talk about audio. So I'm back here on the red tab under shooting. Go down to number 6 here for audio recording. First thing, make sure that your audio recording is turned on. That's pretty important. If you don't have any audio in your camera, it's because your audio is not set to on. And then your audio record level. Okay, what you want here is you want to be adjusting your audio record level so that if you look at those meters in the top part of the frame there, you want your audio to be bouncing between -12 and -3. Something like this is going to be way too low, and that's going to be not so good when you try to bring it up in post. It's not going to sound very good. And if you're all the way up here where your audio, I can't get it to quite bounce high enough here. Maybe if I talk really loud, it'll bounce up there, but not quite. If your audio is bouncing at like -3 and above, it's going to be clipped. That's not so good. So just set the in-camera gain until your audio levels are bouncing just above -12 is a good place to be. Okay, scrolling down to this different purple, okay, the AF/MF or our focus tab here. On the first one here, AF/MF. Going over to focus mode, make sure your camera is not in manual. If you're a beginner, you're probably not in manual, but just make sure it's in continuous AF. If your lens has an AF/MF switch on it and it's kicked over into MF, it will override this. So make sure if you have a switch on your lens, you might not, but if you do, make sure that on your lens, it's on autofocus and not manual focus. And then in camera, make sure it's on continuous autofocus so that your camera is in autofocus. We're going to leave our focus speeds alone for now. I do change those in different types of shots, so we'll come back to that. But going to number 2 here for focus area. Okay, if I click on focus area, I'm going to get this menu in the camera. You might have more options. Let me show you why that is really quickly. Under focus area limit, yours is probably out of box with all of these toggled on. The only ones that I keep toggled on, because there's a lot of redundancy here, I just keep wide, zone, I toggle off center fix, because you can accomplish that with zone. I'll explain. And then your spot, all of these different size of spots are great, except for expand spot. It's kind of the hybrid between all of them and just honestly works better. So I toggle those ones on so that when I'm scrolling through my focus areas, I just have the ones that I use, and it's just less stuff for me to kind of scroll through when I need to. When we're in a wide focus area, the camera is going to use the entire frame to look for focus points. Okay, so the entire frame, which has its pros and cons. When you're in zone, you can actually select, I'm just going to put this right in the center, again, kind of taking care of that center spot and why I deactivate that. It's only going to use the area within that white box there to choose something to focus on. So instead of having the entire frame, you're just going to kind of reduce how much space the camera is using to focus. And then expand spot. This is when you want to get ridiculously precise and make sure that you're focusing on the exact right part of the frame. And again, you can move that box anywhere you want. Expand spot, again, kind of like spot does the same thing. The difference with expand spot is that it's going to prioritize its focus in that center square, but it is also going to look for like anything just slightly outside of it. So it just gets a little bit more flexibility, hence the expand spot than a regular spot. And I found that from a precision perspective to be fantastic when I want something kind of finite or really small to focus on. One thing to double check in your camera, still in this focus tab, I'm just going to scroll down to subject recognition. Subject recognition in autofocus, make sure that says on. Your recognition target, you have a lot of options here, meaning what's the camera going to see within the focus area? Is it going to prioritize focus? If it happens to see an animal and a person there, it'll prioritize the animal. Most of the time, are going to have this on human. Make sure that is set. And then down here under right or left eye select, I leave it on auto. Just make sure it's on one of these, but usually on auto means it'll just kind of pick. I don't really care which eye it chooses as long as it chooses an eye. So those are important ones to make sure your autofocus is functioning at its maximum potential. And here is how it looks when there is a face in the frame. The white box indicator here just means that it's prioritizing the focus point on the face or on the eyes. Scrolling up one to our exposure and color tab, talk about a hot topic here. I'm going to go down to number 5, color and tone. And here is picture profile. I'm going to click that. And once we're in picture profile, there are a lot of options. Here's the only 2 that I use that I think are necessary. Okay, if you go to PP11, that's going to be defaulted to S-Cinetone. This is a really desirable picture profile with these Sony cameras. You would just click it to select that, and now we're in PP11. That would be S-Cinetone. Again, S-Cinetone is a really desirable picture profile. It used to be reserved for higher-end Sony cameras. Now it's finding its way into these consumer cameras, which is awesome. It's really good on skin tones, and it looks really nice, like coming straight out of camera. It doesn't require a lot of work in post. So it's pretty popular, and it's one that I do use at times when I want to just grab something out of camera and have it look good. But it's only going to look good if you nail your exposure and your white balance, which yes, we will talk about those things. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn off picture profile. I'm going to scroll to the left. This is also a picture profile. It's just in a different place. And this is also my preferred one, and that is S-Log3. So here's how to turn that on. This home menu, this nice little video priority, video focused menu on the A7C Mark II. What you're going to do is you're going to scroll down into where it says log shooting setting. We're going to click that, and we're going to go ahead and turn on flexible ISO. Color gamut, you want that to say sgamut3.cine/slog3. Okay, we want that one. And then next under this box here, yours might say something different, but this is the select LUT option. This is not baking a LUT into your footage. It's just giving you a display on the back of the camera for what your footage could look like once it's converted from S-Log3. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll. I'm going to go backwards here to make this make sense. This is how your footage would look. Keep it there. This is how your footage would look if you leave this in S-Log3 in terms of just your preview on the back of the camera. Okay, it's flat, it's a log profile, there's not a lot of contrast. If you put it in standard 709, which is what I do recommend you put it in, then it's just showing like when you get log footage into post-production, you're going to convert it to a Rec 709 to give it contrast and get the colors back. So when you select S709 here, that just means that when you're previewing on the back of your camera, you're looking at it as if it's already been converted, as opposed to looking at it in a flat log profile, which can be nice just for getting things dialed in when you're shooting. So you want that one to be at S709. And essentially what we've just done is we just turned on We turned on S-Log3 in our camera, and we also put a display on with this box here, a display so that when we're looking at our footage on the back of our screen, it looks as if it's already converted like we would do in post. I have a lot to say toward the end of this video about how to make S-Log3 footage look incredible. If you're first starting out, S-Cinetone's probably going to be your best option. It's just one less step. All right, scrolling down to this pinkish one. Maybe this one's pink and that one's purple. Anyway, exposure and color. We're going to go down to number 5 again under color and tone. And soft skin effect. I mean, look, to each their own. I keep this off. I think it looks a little bit too digital when you turn a soft skin on. And on this shooting menu here, we're going to go all the way down to number 10. Okay, under shooting display, emphasize record display. You want to make sure that's set to on. It's like a small quality of life feature here. This is what's going to give the red tally frame around the back of the camera when you are recording to just make it even more obvious that you are recording. And going down to our pink exposure and color here, we're going to go to number 6, zebra display. Yeah, we have a lot more coming on these two things here, but typically I want my zebras turned on, and you can change your zebra level here. We'll be spending a lot of time with these two settings, but that is where, when we talk about those, that's where those two things live. And then down to our yellow tab here, the setup tab, I'm going to go to number 5, touch operation. Just make sure your touch operation is set to on. And I have this as touch panel only, and that's going to be helpful when we want to tap to track a subject on our frame. It can be a nice thing to make sure that you're nailing focus. Our green network tab here has one thing that I do change. I want you guys to scroll down to, where are we at here? Number 8 at the bottom, network option, airplane mode. We're going to go ahead and turn that on. That's going to help you save some battery. It's going to disable Wi-Fi, which you only really need that stuff when you're connecting your smartphone to the camera, which I will be doing later. So I'm going to turn airplane mode off so I don't forget. But typically I have that set to on to just help kind of save some battery life. But one thing that I also do that maybe drains the battery a little bit further, so maybe they cancel each other out. But what you're going to do is you're going to, back here on our yellow setup tab, I'm going to go to power setting option. Power save start time. Your camera comes out of box defaulted at 5 minutes. Just means if you're not doing something on your camera, probably like if you're watching this video and also with your camera out and it keeps going to sleep, this is why. I set mine to 30 minutes. So 30 minutes of me doing nothing to my camera before it goes into power save or sleep mode. I also can see the benefit of just setting this to off and just using your on-off toggle to turn your camera on and off. But 30 is a nice medium. Anyways, the things that might drain the battery a little bit faster, that whole airplane mode conversation, these things cancel themselves out. Auto power off temperature, set that to high. It's going to come out of box. It's standard. When you click high, it's going to give you that warning like your camera's going to explode. It's going to be fine. This just means how hot the camera is going to get before it auto turns itself off. So if you're noticing that your camera's overheating and turning off, this will be why it's set to standard. Trust me, I've had Sony cameras for years. It's nothing bad's going to happen. I'm going to set that to high. Moving back up to our red camera, our shooting icon. I'm going to scroll down on this one, and we are looking for number 8, image stabilization. And on image stabilization, we have steady shot. Okay, I do change this for different types of shots, but the first thing just to know is like this is where the setting lives, and this is how you're turning the camera stabilization on or off. Okay, one thing to note is that when you are in, let me just get a bit of a frame here, might be underexposed or blurry. Let's brighten you up a bit. When you are in standard, there's not, meaning standard image stabilization. Camera does a decent job with its internal image stabilization system. There's no crop. When you go into active, as you can see there, there's standard and here is active. Camera's going to crop in a little bit, but this active option is technically the best stabilization that your camera is going to have. Downside to that, it's using some digital stabilization, so it's cropping on the frame a little bit. So some pros or cons there, but again, I do kind of tweak that around depending upon what kind of shot that I'm doing. Still in our red camera shooting icon here, under image quality and recording, we're going to kick to the right, and we're going to scroll down to this hidden little thing down here that says lens compensation. And in lens compensation, which I have a Tamron lens on this camera right now, which is why this is grayed out. But breathing compensation, if you have a Sony lens on your camera, you have the ability to turn on breathing compensation. What that does is lenses breathe a little bit, meaning there's just they just kind of slightly pulse at times, just depending on some factors, but it'll kind of pulse on the edges of the frame. It can be a little bit distracting. When you toggle that on, it's going to crop a tiny amount. Like here's with the breathing compensation turned off. We're about to turn it on. You can check the crop out. We're going to turn it on in 3, 2, 1. That's with breathing compensation turned on. So a tiny crop, but it is a nice benefit if you're noticing any pulsing on your frame or just kind of distracting thing going on. It's because of breathing compensation for your lens. But this setting will completely eliminate that. But again, it only works with Sony lenses. And lastly, we have our 3 big settings when it comes to exposing our image. Exposure simply just meaning not too bright, not too dark, but just right. Those big 3 settings are ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So for ISO, we're going to go down to our pink exposure and color option. This first tab here, exposure. Going to go to ISO, and this is where you can adjust the camera's ISO. Here are the 2 best ISOs to use for all of the different picture profile options in the camera. These will be the cleanest ones to use, but that doesn't mean that they're the only ones that you can use. For example, like I'm in S-Log3 here, so the best 2 to use for S-Log3, the cleanest ISOs to use are going to be 800 right here and 3200. Those are the 2 best ISOs to use to get the cleanest image out of S-Log3. But that doesn't mean those are the only 2 that you can use. I'll use things like 6400 or 8000. Typically won't go above like 20,000 unless it's like super low light. I might need to go higher, but much above 20,000, the image starts to fall apart a bit. But this camera does extremely well and performs really good at some of these higher ISOs without getting too noisy or losing too much of our color. Simply speaking, when you increase your ISO or make that number higher, the brighter the image gets. When you start to get into the higher ISOs though, you are potentially adding some noise or some grain into the shot, so that's your trade-off there. The next 2, shutter speed and aperture, those can be adjusted by spinning one of these 2 dials on your camera. I do customize these, which we'll talk about how I customize my camera in a second. Shutter speed, here you can see that being adjusted there on the left. In short, with shutter speed, the higher the number goes, the darker the image gets, and the lower the number goes, the brighter the image gets. A good rule of thumb for shutter speed is that you want your shutter to be twice or double your frame rate. So my frame rate right now, we can see at the top of the camera, is in 4K 30. Now the 4K doesn't matter, the 30p does, 30 frames a second. So I want my shutter speed to be double my frame rate. Frame rate 30, shutter speed at 1/60. Where that's an important rule to live by is getting natural motion blur. So this image up on the left here, that is with the proper shutter speed. The shutter on that one is twice the frame rate. If you look at my hands, they're getting a natural motion blur. The image on the right is the wrong shutter speed. It's way too high, so we're getting a really jittery effect with not a lot of motion blur. But let's say that I was recording in 24 frames a second. Oh, if I'm in 24 frames a second, 1/60 is too high. 1/50 isn't exactly double. Double would be 1/48. The next click goes to 1/40, so I don't have the option to do exactly 2x. You can actually do that in camera. So in the menu, I'm on my red shooting icon. I'm going to go down to number 5, shutter/silent. Over here, I'm going to go to anti-flicker set, and we're going to go ahead and turn variable shutter on. Okay, and I'm going to go back to where I just was, and that shutter down there looks a lot different in terms of the numbers. This gives us a little bit more of a precise look. And with this, if I scroll all the way down, I can get exactly, in this case, for that 24 frames a second, I now have a shutter, even though it's not displaying like 1/, this is the same thing. It's a shutter of 48, which is exactly 2x that frame rate of 24. The downside to this one is it takes forever to scroll and get your numbers. So if I were to be filming in like 60 frames a second, it would take me forever to scroll on this and get over to 1/, or to get to 120 to double the frame rate. So that can be kind of annoying, and to be honest with you, I actually keep this variable shutter turned off. And even if I'm in 24 frames a second here, I would just be at 1/50, just close enough to 1/48, or a shutter of 48. And honestly, you're not going to notice a huge difference there. So I keep mine in the standard shutter settings here, and it's a lot faster to get to a higher number. Like if I was in 60p, I can quickly just adjust this from 1/50 right up to 1/125. Not exactly 120, but close enough. Both options are good here. It's your call. All right, next is aperture, which that's being adjusted, that f-stop there. Okay. In general, the higher the number, the darker the image. The lower the number, the brighter the image. You could be limited here by the lens that you're using. The lens I have on this camera, the lowest number that lens can achieve is f2.8. Maybe you have an f1.4 lens, or like an f4 is the lowest you can go. So you'll be limited there on this f-stop number. Besides the lower the number, the brighter the image, the darker the number, or the higher the number, the darker the image. Besides that, what this is also doing is this determines your blur. A lot of times we think about like a cinematic video where we're thinking about a really blurry background, or sometimes a really blurry foreground, but the subject is very separated. F-stop is how you achieve that. So the lower the number, like 2.8 here, for example, but the lower the number, the more blur you're going to achieve. The higher the number, the less blur you're going to achieve. Neither is right or wrong, but that's how you're going to be achieving that blurry look, is via the f-stop. As promised, here is a really big time saver for all of these settings. In my menu, I'm going to go down to this yellow setup option. We're going to go to number 3, which is Operation Customize. Once we're in here, we're going to go make sure in the video icon, this one, you can do the same thing for photo, but we're talking video today. Custom key dial settings. Okay. When you're in here, yours is going to look a little bit different. I'll talk you through mine. When you scroll to the right on this first menu here, rear 1, okay, when I'm scrolling around, the camera is going to be showing what button via that orange highlighter. We're on 2, now we're on 3. It's going to orange highlight the button on the back of the camera that you're actually remapping. You just click on that, and then you can just go through the menu and remap something. Let me show you how I have mine set up. I found this to be really efficient, to use the most frequent settings in the camera to get really cinematic shots. Okay, so this first one here, in this case, this is my C1 button. Again, that's notated by it being highlighted right there on the right side by the orange highlighter with the 1. I'm remapping that one to focus standard. Again, click on it, go through the menu, and you can find these items if you want to mimic how I have mine set. Where that one's really valuable is when it doesn't work if you're in wide focus area, but let's say I'm in zone. When I first select zone, I can move these boxes around, but once I lock them in, can't move them around unless I reset my focus area, which can be kind of annoying. Focus standard, when I just tap on C1, for example, it gives me the ability just to move those around. It's just a fast way to move my focus point. So C1 does that for me. Number 2 here, this is my AF on button. Okay, I have this one set to white balance, and that's going to allow me to, and we'll go through some white balance stuff. When I click that, I can quickly bring up my customizable white balance settings here, which is something that when you start shooting a lot, you'll be doing all of the time. Okay, so that's for white balance. Number 3 is my auto white balance lock toggle. And how that one works, this is a cool little function in these cameras, but this white balance looks crazy right now. That's on purpose. But if your camera's in auto white balance, if the tones are kind of shifting around a little bit, is the auto white balance will always be calibrating, and it can make the colors and tones kind of shift around with it. With that auto white balance toggle, what you do, your camera has to be in auto white balance for this to work. But I'll have the camera in auto white balance. I'll give it a few, maybe like 15 seconds or so to get the white balance of the scene so that it's accurate. And then once it has the white balance, I'm just going to click, one we just looked at here was my C2 or my trash can button. I'm going to click that. And now on the bottom right of the display, it says AWBL. That means lock. That means that the auto white balance will not change, that the camera won't recalibrate white balance until I toggle that off. And now the camera is constantly calibrating what white balance to use until you were like click it again and re-lock it. So for me with that one, back here in my custom keys, we were just looking at the auto white balance lock toggle is why I have that mapped there. Moving into the second menu item here, so rear 2, my center button, I select zebra display select, and then when I push left on my wheel, click left, it pulls up zebra levels. So I'm pushing the center button now for zebra display on or off. And then when I click left, I can quickly access the levels. About to talk about zebras in just a second. So I've been teasing that for long enough at this point. But quick access for those is pretty important. Number 3 I have is not set. That's because for me, my wheel is my ISO. And if I'm spinning my ISO, it's usually to the right to raise it. I don't want to accidentally click down and have some function pop up that I don't need. When I push down, maybe I'm just heavy-handed. I don't know. When I push down, that's going to give me my focus area. So that's what we looked at earlier today. That's just going to give me my different focus options, my focus area options when I press down on that wheel. Okay, so that covers page 2. Top of the camera, the red record button, I put that to audio record level. We have this nice red button that on these cameras would say start movie recording, which is great. I just wanted to re-customize it for something else. In this case, I have it set to audio record level to be able to give me the ability to change my audio levels pretty quickly. And you might be asking then, well, like, how do you start and stop recording on the camera if you changed your red button to be your audio levels? If you just scroll down, we're still in the same section here. We're just scrolling down to record with shutter. Set that to on, and now the main shutter button on your camera, the one you use to take photos, that will start and stop recording, which will free us up to be able to use a button like the red one here to remap to something else. For me, that's audio record level. This one here, if your camera has, or your lens rather, has a button on it, you can custom map that to something. I don't do anything on that for video, but I do a lot on this wheel one here. Yeah, yours is going to look a lot different than this when it's out of box. Number 1, there's some preference here, but this first dial, the front dial here, I set that to AV. That means aperture. That's how I change my aperture in my camera. Number 2, this little wheel on the back, the one closest to the screen, I set that one to exposure compensation, which I use that for like vlog style shots that I promise you we'll dive deep into. Number 3, the big wheel back here, I set that to TV, or just shutter speed. Okay, set that one to shutter speed and changes our shutter. And then my wheel here, I set that one to ISO. Okay, so those being the 3 big ones for exposure. This back one here does my shutter speed. This front dial here does aperture. And then this wheel, I just spin that to increase or decrease my ISO. So really quick access for all my exposure buttons. And we can do the same thing for our function menu. Okay, that's the FN button on the back of your camera. Okay, so when I click on my FN button on the back of my camera, I bring up these different menu items here. You can custom map all of those too. When you click that, you're going to see photo options up top and video options down below. Just depends on if you're in photo or video mode in your camera when you hit the FN button. And you can remap all of these too. I like to think of my custom buttons as the ones that I frequent the most used settings in the camera, and the function menu items are just the ones that are like, I still use a lot, but maybe not quite as much as the main ones that we've custom mapped. If you do all this right, you don't even need to be in the menu in the camera really all that often. I'll briefly run you through how I have mine set. I'm going to actually, it's the same process. You click on it and you go through the menu and you find the thing that you want to map to. So that's how you would change the different function menu settings. I'm going to show y'all what I have mine mapped to real time right now. So when I click, and you can remap yours to match these settings. When I click the function menu here, here's what I have. So the first one here is set to focus mode, which you can see by the orange focus mode there. Just allows me to quickly toggle between continuous or manual focus. Nice to have that there if I happen to be using a lens that doesn't have that toggle. And then right below that is my peaking display. If you start using manual focus, you might want to get into some peaking stuff, but as mentioned earlier, so you're first starting out, I'm going to assume you're in continuous autofocus. We don't got to worry about some of that stuff. File format. This is all the codecs we looked at earlier. If you want rapid access on changing those, same thing with your frame rate, and same thing with those record settings from earlier. Again, just pick the biggest number there. But there are times you want to kind of tweak those around a little bit. Autofocus transition speed and autofocus subject shift sensitivity. These are my focus speeds. I'm not going to bore y'all right now because we'll spend a lot of time on that later today. Steady shot, just a quick toggle of the different in-camera stabilization options. White balance, I know I have that. We just looked at that being set to a custom button. I almost always forget that that's custom map for some reason, so that's just a redundant one for me, so I have an option to get there if I can't remember what button I mapped it to. And then these are the camera does have a feature that allows like that auto framing, which essentially just mimics as if the camera's following you around like a second shooter. These are just my framing settings here. I have framing tracking speed for how fast it's actually tracking that subject. And then crop level of tight, medium, or a little bit wider for that. I don't use that all that often, which again is why it's in my function menu. Last one for me is just touch function in shooting. It's grayed out right now because I'm externally recording via HDMI, but touch function in shooting is just turning on or off if my touch function is set to track or not. Almost always set to on, but there are times when I don't want to be tapping the screen and have it try to track different subjects. The Sony A7C II does have a touch menu where you can change things like white balance, shutter speed, ISO, aperture, and a few other things. So I do have some redundancy. Like a lot of those settings that you could just touch the back of the camera and like change them. I've custom mapped those as we just looked at. I've custom mapped those to some hard buttons. It's really because actually in the menu here, if you go to your touch operation and you go down to your touch panel settings, we're just in the yellow menu here, but touch panel settings under shooting screen, I turn that off. I've actually completely disabled those from being available on the back of the camera. So anyways, I turned that off completely. I just found that if I'm trying to tap to change settings on the back of the screen's really small and I end up just like tapping the wrong thing or tapping to start tracking a subject instead of changing a setting. There's also that like start and stop record one that's up there that you can't change like what that actually is. And the last thing I want to do is accidentally tap and like stop recording at an important time or something. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's because my first camera was like 7 years ago with the Sony A7 III. Didn't have a feature like that, but what was your first camera? Maybe this is your first camera. Maybe the A7C II is your first one. Anyways, I'm going to give you a crash course on exposure and white balance. The first thing I want you to think about when it comes to exposure is this chart. This chart represents the values to expose things to. Don't overthink this one. Just think about these numbers in general. They represent almost anything in a scene, whether that be the values that the shadows might be, or maybe something like a bright white where you still want some detail in the highlights. That will be the value of 90. Or this skin tone bracket here covers all of the skin tones. As an example, if I wanted to expose an average white skin tone, that value would be 60. And now shifting over in camera, we're going to tie these two together in a second. In camera, back on that topic of zebras. First things first, you want to make sure that your zebra display is turned on. Next, I go to zebra level and I see some values here and they look familiar. And that's because these values are the same ones, they match the chart. So 90 on the chart is the same thing as 90 when you select a zebra value. And all that those zebras are really doing on the back of the camera screen is they're just showing you and indicating, depending upon what value that you have them set to, they're showing you when something in your scene is at or above the value that you have selected in your camera. So let's say that I wanted to expose my average white skin tone. Again, make sure zebra display is turned on, and then I'm going to go into zebra level, and I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to make sure that this is set to lower limit, and then I'm going to change the value to match the chart for the thing that I want to expose to. So I'm going to bring that value down to 60. And next, you want to make sure that the subject that you're exposing is facing the light source. That's pretty important. And then this is all we're really going to do. I'm underexposed just for a second, but the first thing to take note of is that I'm shooting in 30 frames a second here, so my shutter speed is going to be 1/60 to double that for natural motion blur. I also have an aperture of f2.8, which is the lowest that this lens will go because I want to get as much, I'm pretty close to the background here, but as much blur as possible that I can in the background. We learned earlier that aperture and shutter speed are going to affect how bright or dark the image is, so I want to set those two things first. So all I can really do to brighten this image at this point is bring my ISO up. This is when you're going to pay attention to zebras. What you're looking for is the point when you're bringing ISO up when zebras just barely start to appear on the subject that you're exposing. Right now, that's going to be my skin tone, and the part that's probably going to get the zebras first is the part that's closest to the light. So we're just going to slowly, and completely ignore any other zebras that are happening on the frame. Like right now we have zebras showing up on this light back here. I'm ignoring that. I just want to make sure that I'm exposing this skin tone to 60 in this example. So I'm just going to be bringing zebras up until zebras just start to appear, and you're kind of seeing them start to show up here maybe, and now they're definitely showing up. So we're just finding that point when zebras just start to appear on the skin tone. And we know that because we have it set to 60, that's indicating that this part of the frame has just hit the exposure of 60, and this is going to be our exposure for this shot. And you would do that exact same thing if you had a shot, let's say that you wanted to expose something to a bright white with a little bit of detail on the highlights. You would just use 90, set the zebra value on your camera at 90, and do the exact same thing. But whatever the main priority is in the scene that you want to have the correct exposure, just identify what value that thing is, set the zebra value, increase your ISO after you've set your shutter speed and aperture, increase or decrease your ISO until zebras barely start to appear, and that's your exposure. And then for white balance, the goal is to get something white in the scene to be true white. You can use one of these white cards or just a piece of paper. Just make sure the paper is not crumpled up. It's got to be a nice straight edge to it. And make sure that you have exposure done first. So like we just learned, expose the scene first, and then make sure that your white reference, whether that's a card or a piece of paper, is facing the light source. After that, all you have to really do is just go in camera, and our goal is just by eyeballing it here. You can look on the back of the camera screen. We want to make sure that the white reference thing that's in frame, after exposed properly and facing the light source, looks true white. This is going to be a lot better option than auto white balance because we can get it just right, and it's actually pretty fast once you know how to do it. So again, all we're going to do, we're going to go in camera here, and earlier I mapped my white balance to my AF on button. It's also in my function menu. We'll access it via function menu, and it's right here. You might, when you first get in here, it might be in auto or something. All you have to do is you're going to go down to the C temp/filter. You're going to kick to the right, and now we can manually adjust our white balance and lock it in. So again, the only goal here is we're just going to be, reducing or increasing this number until that white card looks white, which for me, it's going to be, and these are minor adjustments. You just have to get close For me, that's going to be right here at 5600. I'm going to lock that in, and that will be the white balance of this scene as an example. Cinematic footage isn't like magic. It's just good looking footage done right. In my free 1-hour training, I'll show you the 5 most common Sony camera mistakes and teach you how to avoid them. Plus, we'll deep dive into tools like using zebras for exposure and nailing your white balance every single time, which are both topics that we briefly touched on today. Don't miss out. Register down below. I'll put a link for you to register for that free 1-hour training. I'll see you in there. Okay, as we go through these different types of shots, I'm going to access all of the settings via my custom buttons that we've mapped or the function menu, but they're all the ones that we looked at, so if you prefer to get to them via the regular menu, that's going to work fine too. Okay, if I'm doing a vlog style shot, first thing I want to do is my codecs and frame rates. I'm going to be in XAVC-S 4K. No surprise there. My frame rate, I'm going to be in 30. Again, 24 and 30 are your regular motion frame rates. And then my record setting, I'm just picking the biggest numbers possible, making sure, most importantly, that we're in 10-bit color. And then for my focus area, wide can be good here, but I like using zone and putting that usually right in the center. And the reason for that is that in a vlog style shot, I don't want the camera try to focus on things that are not like my face. In a vlog style shot, there's usually other people walking next to you or beside you, or like different things in the frame that the camera could focus on. Try to do like a little example here. This is not going to be the best vlog setup here, but if you just see that, even for example, like my face right now is being tracked right now for this vlog style shot, and that's because the zone indicated by those white squares is the area that I've limited the focus to. So I don't want the camera to try to focus. There's something like walking over here or like, you know, anything back there to try to focus on. I want to try to prioritize focus just in this space, which right now it's doing a pretty good job of. Additionally with that, I want my focus, autofocus transition speed and my autofocus subject shift sensitivities, I want these low, like locked on for this one and slow for this one. When we get the camera out of box, they're usually, both these are usually cranked up pretty high. And even though it says things like locked on, we kind of normally think that we want our autofocus to be very responsive, which you do when you're tracking fast-moving subjects, but that can also get you into a lot of trouble. Back on this shot here. If the focus is trying to transition really quickly, it might grab different things and like transition to them quickly, and that's when you'll get, and the lens breathing compensation does help this, but the camera will kind of hunt around and grab different focus points, and that can be kind of distracting. I want this shot to lock onto me for the focus and really get kind of sticky and not change focus points really rapidly, which again is why I choose autofocus transition speed as well as autofocus subject shift sensitivity, both of those being set really low all the way down at 1. Now, one thing I am going to do for a vlog style shot is I'm going to turn on, it's going to crop, but I'm going to turn on our active stabilization. That is going to be the most stable that this camera can be. And we're doing a vlog style shot. We're usually walking around, or handheld in general. And this camera is not the lightest camera out there, even though C is for compact. Still get kind of tired and it can get a little bit shaky. So the most in-camera image stabilization that we can get out of the camera, we want to be utilizing by turning that active stabilization on. The next thing I'm going to do, and this is for my vlog type shots only, is I'm going to kick the camera over into the S for shutter priority. And what that's going to do is the camera, I'm in 30 frames a second like we talked about. I want my shutter to be double my frame rate, so 1/60. And for a vlog type shot, I don't want to re-expose it every time I like walk through a shadow or like the lighting changes. I'm just going to let the camera make the exposure decisions for me. I can tell it how I want it to expose, and I'll show you that. But I want to focus on the vlog type shot. I don't want to worry about exposing the image every 20 seconds if the lighting's changing. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing is you want to just take your ISO and you want to put that all the way down until it says auto. And now the ISO is in auto mode, so it's going to be adjusting. And the camera is going to be using both the ISO and the f-stop. In this case, as the lighting scene changes, you can see the f-stop changing a lot there. As the lighting changes, it's going to use the f-stop and the ISO to change for the right brightness while keeping the shutter consistent. This is when you're also going to use your exposure compensation. So this is the one that I custom mapped earlier to this back dial, and I'm changing the exposure composition right now. It's at -2. Usually you want it to be 0.0. It's kind of a preference thing. I'll show you where I like to put the exposure compensation for my vlog type shots, but this is how this image would look. And again, the camera's just using the f-stop and the ISO to get a metering or an exposure compensation of 0.0. Again, it's kind of a preference. You can play around with this and see what you like. I usually like mine at 0.7, just a little bit brighter than 0.0. I found this to be the sweet spot for the settings that I like to use for my vlog type shot. But play around with that and see what you like. The good news is that at least for me, the only time I use shutter priority is for a vlog type shot. So when I kick my camera over into shutter priority, the exposure compensation at 0.7 is right where I left it. I just need to make sure that I scroll down to auto ISO. The camera's going to do the rest to get the exposure that I want. One tiny little note with that is over here on the shooting menu, in the exposure menu, exposure and color, just go to your ISO range limit. You can limit this if you don't, like when it's in shutter priority or an auto ISO, essentially, this is the limit, that the minimums and maximums that the ISO will actually go to. I just leave it wide open, as low as possible and as high as possible, and just let it rip. That's only gonna matter when you're in an auto ISO setting. And then when you get it right, your vlog shots will look something like this, where nice and stable with that active stabilization. And as I'm going through some of these shadows, being in shutter priority, it's taking care of the exposure for us. It's too bad I didn't live somewhere a little more scenic. It's pretty brown here, the winter in Pennsylvania, but with the settings all dialed in, can you imagine how good it would look? Okay, so for this slow motion shot, I've got my friend Aaron here who's going to be displaying a beautiful golf swing for all of us. And the first thing for slow motion that I want to take a look at here is that I'm going to be an XAVC-S in 4K. Frame rate is going to need to go up to 60, which we're going to see that crop come into effect now. I am touch to track at the moment for slow motion, and I'm also in I'm in wide, because when I go handheld on this, I need the entire frame to be able to make sure I keep focus. From there, I'm going to go and make sure that I'm using the biggest numbers possible for this codec here, and then I'm shooting in 10-bit color to get the best looking footage that we possibly can. And for my shutter speed, I'm going 1/125 to double the frame rate of 1/60. Aperture is a little bit low light in here. Typically with the slow motion shot, I'd like to be around like f4 just to make sure I have a little bit of forgiveness on focus. But I'm at f2.8 today just because mitigating the low light, trying to keep my ISO as low as possible. I already got the ISO using zebras to get the perfect exposure for 60 on his skin tone. And the last piece I'm going to do before we get our slow motion shot here is I'm going to go into my steady shot. We're going to get even more of a crop here. We're going into active. So kind of getting a bit of a double crop here with the A7C Mark II. In 4K 60, we have a crop, and then with active stabilization, we also have a crop. Right before we look at that slow motion golf swing coming out of this A7C Mark II, it's important to note two things when it comes to slow motion in general. First off, if you're in a space and maybe you don't have like a wide enough lens, or the space is tight and that 4K 60 crop is just making it too hard to get the frame you want, one thing I will do is I will change from 4K. I'll go into HD, so we are losing some resolution here, and I'll change my record frame rate all the way to 120 frames a second. You could technically also keep that at 60 if I have availability for 120. So I'm going to go to 120. So it's even going to be slower motion, twice as slow as 60. And that's also not going to have nearly the crop that 4K 60 would have. So I'd go to 120, I'd bring my shutter to 1/250. It's going to darken it up a little bit, but that's what I would do if that crop is just a little bit too much. I would go into HD and go into 120. Also, if you kick the camera, I prefer to get my slow motion by just simply choosing my frame rate, and then I'll take either a 120 frame or a 60 frames a second. I'll take one of those two. I'm just going to slow it down in post-production. This camera does also have something called S&Q. So if you kick the toggle over into S&Q mode, you go into your menu. I'm on this red shooting tab here. I'm going to go one image quality / recording and go to S&Q settings. And then once I'm in my S&Q settings, I can just go through this and I can slow this down by simply saying I want my end product to be in 30 frames a second. So my S&Q, my slow motion, I want that to record in 4K 60, and that's going to do the exact same thing. The difference is it's actually going to slow it down in camera, so you don't have to slow it down in post. I just find all the S&Q stuff to be a little bit confusing, and I just slow my stuff down in post, so I just skip that step completely. But let's take a look at this slow motion shot that we got. 4K 60 here. I think it looks clean, nice and smooth, buttery slow motion, which I like a lot. It's even at a higher ISO at 6400, and the colors held up pretty well. Just the benefit of that 4K 60. Wouldn't it be nice if someone would just simplify all of this camera stuff? I've got your back. Tap that subscribe button down below, and let's make it easy. And for my studio shot, the one y'all been looking at for a long time today, same thing for like interviews, just some basic settings on that. It's really similar to the vlog stuff. There's a few small changes that I make. File format for me, XAVC 4K, record frame rate 30 or 24, record setting, again, very similar to the vlog shot, but 140 meg 422 10-bit. My autofocus transition speeds and my autofocus subject shift sensitivities are set really low. Studio shot, there's not a lot of fast moving action. Like our slow motion stuff, I crank these up because I want it to keep up. In a studio or an interview, I want it to lock onto the subject and not jump around. I keep my steady shot turned to off. For a studio or an interview, the camera's locked off on a tripod. I don't need any in-camera stabilization. And then for my my shutter speed, double the frame rate at 1/60. We know that. F-stop usually low, not always, but usually as low as possible to get some blur in the background. And I'm just going to use my ISO to get my exposure from there. And here's how that's going to look in the studio. And boom, we've got our studio shot that we've been looking at today. White balance, same thing I do is I just use the white card, make it look white, or because I know my key light is at 5600, if I put my camera to match my main key light lighting the subject in camera at 5600, whites will be white, skin tones will look good, but that's a studio shot. Oh, focus area, same thing, is just the zones. So I just use the zone here and I actually put it toward the top as opposed to directly in the middle, but just the regular zone focus indicated by those 4 squares. Same idea. If it was on wide, the camera might make some mistakes and maybe focus like on the light back over there or on the chair or something. But yeah, just zone, I limit the odds of it focusing on the wrong thing. And here's the big time saver thing that you can do for this section. These cameras, if you go through and you set everything how you want it for one of those types of shots, like everything you want, everything from, you know, your stabilization to your file formats, your frame rates, your record settings, your focus speeds, literally everything that you think you need for a regular type of shot that you're going to do frequently. Once you set every single setting when the camera's in M mode or manual, then when you go into your menu, all I want you to do is you're going to go down to this memory recall setting option. Okay, so that is in our red shooting menu under shooting mode. We're going to go to camera set memory. Okay, and once we're in here, as soon as you click either 1, 2, or 3, okay, again, after you've set everything how you want it to, maybe number 1 is your vlog style shot, maybe this is your slow motion, maybe this number 3 is your studio shot, or whatever is going to be best for what you frequently shoot. As soon as I click this, if I click number 1, it's going to say registered. Okay, as soon as I click number 1, it's going to register every single setting that I just did. And up top on the camera dial, we have those same 1, 2, and 3 settings. So whenever I spin that into either 1, 2, or 3, it's just going to pull up all the settings that I mapped to one of those containers. It can save you a ton of time for your frequent type of shots, that way you're not just like changing all these settings every single time. You can give yourself a good baseline, make your small adjustments, usually to exposure, and you're good to go. And if you want to learn a simple system to nail your S-Log3 footage every single time, you're going to want to check out this video. I think I made it so easy to get right that it's going to be good for even you beginners out there who I think I said toward the beginning of this video might want to avoid S-Log3. Anyways, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. See ya.